The townhouse on the Upper East Side smelled of lemon oil and mahogany that March morning. Eloise had been working there for only 2 months, organizing the vast collection of books and documents belonging to the Manhattan real estate magnate, a man who'd amassed a fortune in property development between New York and Boston, and now, in his mid-40s, lived alone in that imposing brownstone overlooking Central Park. The job offer had arrived at a critical moment. Bills from Mount Sinai Hospital were piling up like snow in a blizzard, and her father needed treatments that only money could buy. She'd accepted without hesitation, even knowing that working so close to someone like Sutton, a man who exuded power and loneliness in equal measures, would challenge her inner peace. "I don't know what you're talking about," she responded instinctively, but her fingers betrayed the lie by rising to her mouth. He approached, each step echoing on the marble floor, and she felt his woodsy cologne invade her personal space. "You're lying now, and when you lie, you bite your lips." The observation left her breathless. How did he know? How many other things had he noticed? How many of her secrets were already exposed before those eyes that seemed to see through the walls she'd built? The following days brought a different tension to the routine. Sutton began appearing in the library more frequently, bringing coffee in porcelain cups, sitting in the leather armchair near her desk. Conversations flowed about literature, Fitzgerald, Hemingway, the authors she loved and he collected in rare editions. But always, those eyes returned to her mouth. And Eloise discovered something disturbing. The more she tried not to bite her lips, the more the gesture became involuntary. It was as if her body had decided to betray her completely. The first real change happened when autumn painted Central Park in golden hues. She was cataloguing rare books when she found a folder hidden between ancient pages. Inside, photographs of a younger Sutton, smiling beside a dark-haired woman in the Hamptons. Happiness radiated from those images, but they all ended abruptly. No recent photos, no trace of that joy in the last 10 years. Eloise understood then that he too carried secrets, that this townhouse was as much prison as refuge. That same week he called her to the main study. The room smelled of leather and Cuban cigars, masculine and imposing. "I need to make you a proposition." His words fell like stones into a calm lake. He needed a companion for social events, business dinners at the Plaza, openings at the Met, meetings with Boston investors. Someone who could represent the image of stability his partners expected to see. In return, he'd double her salary. She need only stand beside him. Nothing more. At first, it seemed simple. Wear designer dresses he had delivered, smile for cameras, hold his arm at events. But each accidental touch sent electric waves through her skin. Each time he placed his hand on the small of her back to guide her through a crowd of Manhattan businessmen, she felt the world melt. And Sutton? He watched her with an intensity that made her knees weaken, especially when she bit her lips. Winter brought complications. His family appeared for the holidays. Vivian, the elegant and icy sister from Boston, and her husband, Gregory, a calculating businessman from Connecticut. During Christmas dinner, while sampling pecan pie and eggnog, Vivian studied Eloise like someone evaluating a forged painting. "What an interesting choice," she commented, her voice dripping with contempt. "How much is my brother paying you to pretend you care?" The words cut deep, especially because they touched a truth Eloise was desperately trying to deny. It was no longer pretense. She really cared. Dangerously. January arrived with torrential rains and a devastating discovery. Eloise overheard unintentionally one of Sutton's phone conversations. An important corporate merger with Philadelphia investors, scheduled months ago, cancelled without explanation. When she asked Warren, the trusted driver, she discovered that Sutton had refused crucial meetings on 3 different occasions, all coinciding with moments when she'd needed time to take her father to the hospital. He was sacrificing multi-million-dollar deals for her, and hadn't even mentioned it. Anger and gratitude mixed into a bitter cocktail. On a rainy February afternoon, with the cold New York wind lashing the windows, she confronted him. "Why? Why do you do this? I'm just an employee, someone you pay to be here." Sutton stood, approached, and for the first time touched her face with a gentleness that made her want to cry. "You think I didn't notice? From the first day when you walked in here with that stubborn pride in your eyes, carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, I watched you work late, phone the hospital in secret, count every dollar. I watched you refuse help, refuse everything except what you considered dignified. Eloise tried to pull away, but he held her face with both hands, calloused from work despite the fortune. And I watched you bite your lips whenever someone asked about your life, whenever you tried to hide the truth. You do it when you want to protect the people you love, when your father asks if you're eating well, when I ask if you're tired, you bite your lips and lie to spare others. Tears fell before she could stop them, salty as the Atlantic Ocean. I can't let you sacrifice everything for me. It's not fair. His voice came out hoarse, vulnerable. Fair was watching you every day and pretending it was just work. Fair was watching other men look at you at receptions at the MoMA and having to suppress jealousy. Fair was discovering that for the first time in 10 years, since Cora left after a devastating accident on the Taconic, I wanted to wake up in the morning. The revelation hit her like an ocean wave. He'd loved and lost. He understood pain, and now he was choosing to risk again. With her. What if I'm not enough? She whispered, old insecurity emerging. Sutton smiled, a sad and genuine smile. You're already more than I deserve to hope for. You brought life to this dead house. You brought discussions about Fitzgerald at 3 in the morning, spilled coffee on Persian rugs, jazz playing in empty corridors. You brought a reason for me to want to build something beyond money. When he kissed her, finally, the taste of salt from her tears mixed with the promise of new beginnings. Outside, the bells of St. Patrick's Cathedral rang 6 o'clock, as they had for over a century. And for the first time in months, Eloise didn't bite her lips. She didn't need to hide the truth anymore. Not from Sutton, not from herself. The solitary Manhattan magnate had discovered her secret. Yes, but in the process, she'd discovered his. That true wealth was never in bank accounts, but in the courage to love again. Even when the world insists that a girl from a humble family and a real estate tycoon can't meet. In the end, they both learned that the heart knows no social classes, respects no differences, calculates no risks. It simply feels deeply, irreversibly, completely, like the love born in the pages of the American novels they both admired. The following days brought a different tension to the routine. Sutton began appearing in the library more frequently, bringing coffee in porcelain cups, settling into the leather armchair near her desk. Conversations flowed about literature, Fitzgerald, Hemingway, the authors she loved, and he collected in rare editions. But always those eyes returned to her mouth, and Eloise discovered something disturbing. The more she tried not to bite her lips, the more the gesture became involuntary. It was as if her body had decided to betray her completely. Tell me about your father, Sutton asked one rainy afternoon while water hammered the windows with Manhattan fury. Eloise felt panic climb up her throat. No one in this house knew about the illness, the nights at the hospital, how every dollar of her salary went to medications that barely kept her father alive. He's fine, she lied, and her teeth found her lower lip before she could stop it. Sutton leaned forward, elbows on knees, studying her with that intensity that made her feel naked. There it is again. Every time you talk about your family, every time someone asks about your personal life, you bite your lips as if you could contain the true words inside your mouth. She stood abruptly, walking to the window. The city stretched beyond, thousands of anonymous lives moving beneath the rain. My personal life is nobody's business, she said with more harshness than intended. You're right, he conceded, and something in his tone made her turn. There was sadness in his face, a melancholy he rarely let show. We all have a right to our secrets. I understand that better than anyone. Curiosity overcame fear. What secrets do you keep, Sutton Reed? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The ones that weigh too much to share with strangers. Am I a stranger? The question emerged before she could filter it, loaded with meaning neither was ready to explore. The silence stretched between them, dense and electric. Finally, Sutton stood, walking until he was inches away. The scent of his cologne, notes of cedar and bergamot, enveloped her like a cloud. I don't know, Eloise, are you? Her lips trembled, and this time it wasn't a nervous tic. It was something more dangerous, more real. Before she could respond, Sutton stepped back, breaking the spell. There's an important dinner tomorrow, and he said, his voice returning to its professional tone. "Boston investors, I need you to accompany me." "Me? But I'm just the librarian." "You're much more than that." The words hung in the air, laden with unspoken implications. "I'll have a dress delivered tomorrow morning. Emerald green, I think it'll be perfect on you." That night, Eloise returned to her small Brooklyn apartment with her head spinning. Her father slept on the couch, face pale and gaunt. Medications sat on the table, a constant reminder of why she couldn't afford emotional complications with her boss. But when she closed her eyes, she only saw those hazel eyes watching her, reading every gesture, every lie, every hidden truth. And for the first time in years, Eloise wondered what would happen if she stopped hiding, if she allowed someone to see the cracks in her carefully constructed facade. The dress arrived at 9 in the morning, wrapped in tissue paper and satin ribbon. Emerald green as promised, with a cut that suggested elegance without being ostentatious. Eloise held it against her body in front of the mirror, and for a moment didn't recognize the woman staring back. "You look beautiful," her father whispered from the bathroom doorway, his voice weak but full of pride. "Like your mother in her best days." Eloise swallowed the lump in her throat. Her mother had died 5 years ago, a sudden aneurysm that gave no time even for goodbyes. Since then, it had been just her and Dad against the world, against illness, against the relentless tide of medical bills threatening to drown them. "It's just a job, Dad," she said, though they both knew it was a lie. Her lips moved toward her teeth, but she forced herself to stop. She needed to practice control, especially if she'd spend an entire evening under Sutton's omniscient gaze. The car arrived at 7 sharp. Warren, Sutton's trusted driver, opened the door with a kind smile. The black Mercedes glided through Manhattan streets like a shark in familiar waters, carrying her from Brooklyn to the elegant Plaza Hotel. Sutton waited in the lobby, devastatingly handsome in a black tuxedo. When he saw her descend from the car, something changed in his expression, a flash of wonder that disappeared almost instantly, replaced by his usual mask of control. "I knew the green would be perfect," he murmured, offering his arm. "It brings out your eyes." The banquet hall was a display of opulence, bohemian crystal chandeliers, tables covered with white linen tablecloths, floral arrangements that must cost more than her monthly rent. The Boston investors were middle-aged men, accompanied by jeweled wives who studied Eloise with barely disguised curiosity. "Sutton, you finally introduce us to someone special," commented one investor, Mr. Harrington, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We were beginning to think you'd become a permanent hermit." "Eloise works with me," Sutton explained naturally, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture that sent electric shocks down her spine. "She's an expert in American literature of the Gilded Age." Conversations flowed between red wine and plates of lobster. Eloise surprised herself enjoying the discussions about art and business, contributing observations that made the men look at her with renewed respect. But each time Sutton touched her, a casual brush reaching for a glass, his fingers grazing hers when sharing documents, her heart beat uncontrollably. At one point, while desserts were being served, Harrington's wife leaned toward Eloise with malicious curiosity. "How did you manage to capture our elusive Sutton's attention? Many have tried and failed." Eloise felt her cheeks burn. "I didn't. We haven't. She fascinates me with her honesty." Sutton interrupted softly, but his gaze was steel. "A rare quality in our circles, don't you think, Mrs. Harrington?" The woman retreated, recognizing the implicit warning, but the damage was done. Eloise excused herself to the restroom, needing a moment to regain composure. In front of the marble vanity mirror, she studied her reflection. The dress was beautiful, the makeup flawless, but beneath the facade she was still the same Brooklyn girl lying about her father's health and hiding truth by biting her lips. "I don't belong here," she whispered to her reflection. "And where do you belong?" Sutton's voice startled her. He'd entered the restroom without her noticing, his presence filling the elegant space. "Among old books and guarded secrets." "This isn't real," she said, turning to face him. "These clothes, this dinner, this role I'm playing, none of this is me." Sutton took a step forward, then another, until he was so close she could see the golden flecks in his hazel eyes. "And who are you, Eloise? The woman who pretends everything's fine while her world crumbles? The one who sacrifices everything for her family without asking for help? How? Warren told me you go to the hospital twice a week, that you pay for medications that cost more than your salary, that you live in an apartment without heat in Brooklyn. His voice was soft, but each word hit her like a hammer. How long did you think you could keep the secret? Tears threatened to ruin her makeup. It's not your problem. Maybe it wasn't, he admitted, raising a hand to touch her cheek with a tenderness that completely disarmed her. But it became my problem when I started to care about you. When I discovered I wait each morning to see if you'll arrive with that determined expression on your face. When your little gesture of biting your lips became the most fascinating thing about my day. Eloise closed her eyes, unable to sustain the intensity of his gaze. This is insane. Sanity is overrated, he whispered, and when she opened her eyes, she found him smiling with a vulnerability he'd never shown before. Give me permission to help you, please. And there, in the restroom of a luxury hotel, while an important dinner continued without them in the hall, Eloise faced a decision that would change everything. Continue carrying the weight of the world alone, or allow someone to see beyond the mask. Her lips trembled, but this time she didn't bite them. The tension between them changed after that night at the plaza. Sutton stopped maintaining professional distance, and Eloise discovered she missed the barriers that had once frustrated her. At least with barriers she knew where she stood. Without them she navigated unknown waters without map or compass. A week later, while cataloguing first editions in the library, Sutton entered with a leather folder under his arm. His expression was serious, almost formal, and Eloise felt a shiver of apprehension. I need to propose something, he began, sitting on the edge of the desk. And I need you to hear the entire proposal before refusing. Eloise set down the book she was holding. You're scaring me. That's not my intention. He opened the folder, revealing legal documents with the letterhead of a prestigious Manhattan law firm. Your father's treatments need continuity. I've researched with specialists at Johns Hopkins. There are experimental options in Germany that could significantly extend his life. Eloise's heart stopped. Sutton, I can't. Please, listen first. His voice had a shade of urgency. I need a wife. The world tilted dangerously. What? Not in the traditional sense, he clarified quickly. A paper wife, for business reasons. My Boston partners have made it clear that my eternal bachelor image is affecting negotiations. They want stability, family, the illusion of normalcy. Eloise stood, needing distance to process what she was hearing. You're asking me to pretend to be your wife? I'm asking you to help me save my company while I help save your father. Sutton stood too, following her to the window. It would be an agreement, 2 years. Live here, accompany me to events, maintain appearances. In return, all your father's medical expenses covered. Experimental treatments at Mayo Clinic, the best specialists. This is insane, she whispered, hands trembling. And what happens after 2 years? A clean and discreet divorce, and a financial settlement that will allow you to live comfortably for the rest of your life. Eloise turned to look at him, searching for signs of deception in his face. She found only sincerity and something darker, desperation perhaps. Why me? You could hire any actress, any model. Because I trust you. The words were simple, but loaded with meaning. Because when I look at you, I see someone who understands what it means to make impossible sacrifices for the people you love. And because... He stopped, as if the next words cost too much. Because with you it's easy to imagine it's not just an act. Silence fell between them, heavy and electric. Outside, the April sun painted Manhattan streets with golden light, oblivious to the impossible decision facing a young woman from Brooklyn who'd never dreamed of townhouses or mysterious magnates. I need time, she said finally. You have until Monday, he responded, leaving the documents on the desk. And Eloise. He stopped at the door, looking at her over his shoulder. Don't make the decision for me. Make it for your father, for yourself, for the chance to stop lying about how much each day costs you. When he left, Eloise sank into the chair, hands covering her face. The familiar gesture arrived without thinking, her teeth finding her lower lip, biting until she almost tasted the metallic flavor of blood. That night, sitting beside her father's hospital bed, Eloise watched the machines, monitoring each weak heartbeat. The doctor had been clear that morning. Without aggressive treatment soon, he had months, maybe only weeks. "What would you do, Mom?" she whispered to the empty air, as if her mother could hear from wherever souls go after death. "Would you accept the gilded cage to save the person you love?" But there was no answer, only the constant beep of machines and the weight of a decision no daughter should have to make. Eloise accepted the proposal on a Sunday afternoon, beneath torrential rain that lashed New York like tears from the sky. Sutton received her in his private study, a room she'd never seen before. Walls lined with dark wood, windows overlooking Central Park, a crackling fireplace fighting the April chill. "Are you certain?" he asked, and for the first time since she'd known him, Eloise saw real fear in his eyes. "Once we sign these papers, there's no going back. At least not without consequences. My father is dying," she said with firm voice, though her hands trembled as she took the pen. "The consequences of doing nothing are worse than anything this agreement might bring." They signed in silence, their names intertwining in black ink on cream paper, sealing a pact that was part lie, part truth, completely impossible to define. When they finished, Sutton removed a green velvet box from a drawer. "This belonged to my grandmother," he explained, opening the box to reveal a vintage engagement ring, white gold with an emerald surrounded by small diamonds. "She wore it for 50 years of real marriage. It seems appropriate for someone who understands the value of sacrifice." Eloise let him slide the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if made for her. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Like its new owner, sire," Sutton responded, but something in his tone made her look up. The intensity in his eyes wasn't that of a man making a business deal. It was something deeper, more dangerous. The following days were a whirlwind. Lawyers, prenuptial agreements, confidentiality contracts. Warren moved Eloise's belongings from her Brooklyn apartment to the Upper East Side townhouse. Her father was transferred to a luxury private clinic where specialists from across the country reviewed his case. "I don't understand," her father murmured the first night in the new clinic, confused but visibly more comfortable in the adjustable bed with Egyptian cotton sheets. "How can we afford all this?" Eloise bit her lips before responding. "My boss, Sutton, is helping us. He's generous." "No man is that generous without reason," her father observed with the wisdom of someone who'd lived long enough to understand human motives. "Is he courting you?" The question caught her off guard. "It's complicated." "Love always is, daughter." "Love?" Eloise left the clinic with that word echoing in her head like a bell. It wasn't love, it was an agreement, a deal, two people helping each other survive the storms of their lives. There was no room for love in such a clinically defined transaction. Or was there? The wedding was scheduled for 6 weeks later, enough time to make necessary arrangements, but not so much as to raise suspicions. It would be intimate, only close family and necessary witnesses, at a private chapel on an estate the Reed family owned in the Hudson Valley. "My sister Vivian will come," Sutton warned one afternoon while they dined in the formal dining room of the townhouse. It was strange to share that enormous space with just the two of them, like two strangers on a stage too large. "She won't be kind. She's never approved of anyone she considers beneath our status." "And am I beneath?" Eloise couldn't avoid the defensive tone. In her twisted mind, anyone who doesn't come from old money and established surnames is beneath. Sutton set down his fork, studying her with that penetrating gaze that still made her feel naked. "But to me, you're the most valuable person I've met. Your courage, your loyalty. Those things can't be bought." Eloise felt heat rise up her neck. "You don't really know me, don't I?" He leaned forward, the candle between them casting dancing shadows on his face. "I know you prefer black coffee, but take it with cream out of courtesy. That you read Fitzgerald when you're sad and Hemingway when you need to escape. That every time you get good news about your father, you knock on wood 3 times for luck. And I know that when something scares you, you bite your lips until they almost bleed." She swallowed hard. "You watch me too much." "I watch you enough to know this marriage will be anything but simple." He was right. The night before the wedding, Eloise lay awake in her new room, an enormous suite overlooking the garden, decorated in cream and gold tones, wondering what the hell she'd done. Tomorrow she'd marry a man she barely knew, committing 2 years of her life to an elaborate lie. But when she thought of her father, sleeping peacefully in a clinic where the world's best doctors worked to save him, she knew she'd make the same choice, 1,000 times, regardless of personal cost. What she didn't know then, as the full moon shone over Manhattan, was that the cost would be much higher than she'd ever imagined. Because falling in love in a fake marriage wasn't in the contract. And yet, she could already feel the first cracks in her heart, opening to let in a man who should never have meant anything more than a transaction. The chapel in the Hudson Valley Hills smelled of incense and white roses. Eloise observed herself in the dressing room mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. The wedding dress was a masterpiece of French lace and ivory silk, simple but elegant, nothing ostentatious, exactly what she would have chosen for a real wedding. But this wasn't real. She needed to remember that. "You look radiant," Vivian said from the doorway, though her tone suggested exactly the opposite. Sutton's older sister was an impeccably dressed woman in navy blue, with pearls in her ears and a smile that didn't reach her cold eyes. "Though I must admit I'm surprised by the rush. Is there a particular reason?" The insinuation was clear. Eloise met her gaze in the mirror. "Only that when two people are certain, there's no reason to wait." "Certain?" Vivian approached, unnecessarily adjusting Eloise's veil with cold fingers. "My brother has been alone for 10 years, since Cora's accident. And suddenly, you appear, a librarian without pedigree or lineage, and within months convince him to marry. Forgive me if I seem skeptical." Eloise turned to face her directly. "I don't need your approval, Vivian, just your respect. And if you can't give that, at least maintain civility during the ceremony." For a moment she saw genuine surprise in the other woman's eyes. Then, something that might have been respect. "Perhaps you have more spine than I thought." Vivian headed to the door but stopped at the threshold. "I just hope you don't break his heart. He's suffered enough." When she was alone, Eloise felt the weight of those words. She'd never thought about how this agreement might hurt Sutton. She'd been so focused on her own sacrifice, on saving her father, that she hadn't considered he was also risking something. His heart, perhaps, or at least what remained of it after losing Cora. The organ music began, signaling the ceremony's start. Warren appeared to escort her. Her father was too weak to travel, another reminder of why she was doing this. As she walked down the intimate chapel's aisle, her eyes found Sutton's at the front. He looked at her as if it were real, as if this moment meant something more than papers and contracts. The dark grey suit made him look younger, more vulnerable, and when she reached his side, he took her hand with fingers that trembled almost imperceptibly. "You're beautiful," he whispered, eyes shining. The priest began the traditional ceremony. Eloise pronounced her vows in a trance, words about eternal love and fidelity that tasted like ashes in her mouth. When Sutton's turn came, he surprised her by departing from the script. "Eloise," he began, holding both her hands, "I can't promise you perfection. I can't promise it will be easy, but I can promise that while you're under my protection, you'll never have to carry the weight of the world alone, that your tears will be my tears, that your victories will be my victories, and that every day I'll try to be worthy of the trust you place in me." These weren't the vows they'd rehearsed. They were more honest, more vulnerable, and when he finished speaking, Eloise saw tears shining in his eyes. Tears telling her that perhaps, just perhaps, this had stopped being just an agreement long ago. "You may kiss the bride," the priest announced. Sutton leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wished, but Eloise didn't move. When their lips met, soft and reverent, something inside her broke. It wasn't the passionate kiss from movies. It was more intimate than that. It was a promise, a shared secret, a recognition that they'd crossed an invisible line, and there was no going back. The reception was small but elegant. French champagne, classical music, polite conversations with the few guests. Vivian watched them like a hawk, but Eloise no longer paid her attention. She was too aware of Sutton's hand at her waist, the warmth of his body when they danced the traditional waltz, how his eyes kept finding her across the room as if magnetized. "Any regrets?" he asked as they danced, his breath warm against her temple. Eloise considered lying. Instead, she said, "Ask me in 2 years." 2 years, he repeated, and something in his voice sounded sad. What if by then we don't want to end this? Her heart skipped. The contract. To hell with the contract. He spun her in the dance, pulling her closer. What if we discover we're not acting at all? Eloise had no answer for that, because deep down, terrifyingly deep down, she already knew the truth. She hadn't been acting for weeks, and every time Sutton touched her, every time he looked at her as if she were something precious, she sank deeper into a feeling that wasn't in their carefully negotiated contract. She was falling in love with her fake husband. And that was more dangerous than any lie she'd told, biting her lips. The honeymoon didn't exist. Sutton had urgent meetings in Boston, negotiations that had been pending awaiting his personal stabilization. Eloise stayed at the Manhattan townhouse, navigating the strange reality of being Mrs. Reed. The first crisis arrived 3 weeks after the wedding. Eloise was in the library when the phone rang, a call from the clinic where her father was hospitalized. "Mrs. Reed, we need you to come immediately. Your father has suffered a complication." The world stopped. With trembling hands, she dialed Sutton's number in Boston. It went to voicemail. She tried again. Nothing. Business meetings had swallowed him, as always. Warren drove her to the clinic at breakneck speed. She found her father, pale as a sheet, surrounded by monitors beeping frantically. Doctors spoke in technical terms she barely understood. Cardiac crisis, severe arrhythmia, need for immediate intervention. "Where's your husband?" her father asked weakly when the doctors left. "You should have someone with you at times like this." Eloise bit her lips so hard she tasted blood. "He's busy. Important work." More important than this? There was no answer for that. She spent the next 6 hours in the waiting room alone, while surgeons worked on her father's heart. She tried calling Sutton repeatedly. Nothing. Just voicemail after voicemail, his recorded voice promising to return the call soon. When he finally emerged from surgery, it was midnight. Her father was stable, but critical. Eloise collapsed into a plastic chair, tears flowing freely for the first time in weeks. She'd been so busy being the perfect wife, the new lady of the townhouse, that she'd almost forgotten her father was the reason she was in this impossible marriage. "Mrs. Reed." She looked up to find a young nurse holding a phone. "Your husband is on the line. He's been calling frantically." Eloise took the phone with hands still trembling. "Where were you?" "Eloise, I'm so sorry." Sutton's voice sounded destroyed. "I left my phone in the hotel room during the meeting. When I saw the calls, Warren told me everything. I'm taking the first flight. I'll be there in 3 hours." "It's over," she said, her voice flat. "The surgery's over. He's stable. You don't need to." "Yes, I do." The interruption was firm. "I need to be there with you. Eloise, please wait for me." But when she hung up, something inside her had changed. The illusion that this marriage could be something more than transactional had cracked. Sutton had his world of business and power, and she had her reality of hospitals and fear. Two worlds that had collided temporarily, but perhaps could never truly merge. Sutton arrived at 3 in the morning, still in his business suit, hair disheveled from rushing. He found her asleep in the waiting room chair, and when Eloise woke to his gentle touch on her shoulder, she saw something in his eyes that completely disarmed her. Real panic, genuine fear. "I thought I'd lost you," he whispered, kneeling in front of her. "When Warren told me you were here alone, that you needed help and I wasn't there." "Sas, I've always been alone," Marina said harder than she intended. "This agreement doesn't change that. You have your life, I have mine." The pain that crossed his face was palpable. "Is that what you think? That this is just an agreement?" "Eloise, don't." She stood, needing distance. "Don't say things you can't follow through on. Don't complicate this more than it already is." "It's already complicated," he insisted, standing too. "It got complicated the day I started caring about you. It got complicated when your worries became mine. When the thought of you suffering alone made me take a flight in the middle of the most important negotiation of the year." "You left the negotiation?" "For you, yes." Silence fell between them, heavy with implications. Finally, Eloise asked the question that had been gnawing at her heart. What would Cora have done? Sutton recoiled as if she'd struck him. "What?" "Your dead wife, the one you loved enough to isolate yourself for 10 years. What would she have done in my place?" Cora was. He stopped, searching for words. She was different. We came from the same world, shared the same life. She never had to question whether she belonged. Exactly. Eloise felt the knot in her throat tighten. I don't belong in your world, Sutton. And you don't belong in mine. This marriage, this farce. Maybe it was a mistake. Don't say that. He approached, taking her face in his hands. Please, don't say that. Why not? It's the truth. We're too different. You're the strongest woman I've ever known. His thumbs wiped away tears she didn't know she'd shed. You're someone who sacrifices her own happiness without blinking. Someone who lies biting her lips to protect others. Someone who makes me want to be better than I am. You can't save me, Sutton. I know. He smiled sadly. But maybe we could try to save each other. The kiss they shared in that hospital waiting room wasn't like their wedding kiss. It was desperate, honest, loaded with all the fear and hope neither dared verbalize. And when they separated, Eloise knew she'd crossed the point of no return. She could no longer pretend this was just a contract. She could no longer protect her heart behind lies and bitten lips. She'd fallen in love with her fake husband, and that would change everything. The following months brought an uncomfortable truce. Eloise's father recovered slowly, the experimental treatments showing promising results. Sutton cancelled business trips to be more present, trying to rebuild the trust he'd almost lost that night at the hospital. But the cracks in their fabricated marriage began to widen. Vivian's second visit arrived like a storm in October. She brought Gregory, her Connecticut husband, and a barely contained malice. During dinner in the formal dining room, she dropped the bomb. I've been investigating, she announced casually over the second course, as if discussing the weather. It turns out Eloise signed quite an unusual marriage contract before the wedding. Isn't that fascinating? Eloise's fork clattered onto her plate. Sutton tensed beside her. Vivian. Oh, don't misunderstand me. Her smile was a knife wrapped in silk. I don't judge. It's clever, really. 2 years. Mutual benefits, a clean exit. Very practical. Though I wonder what your partners would think if they knew your stable marriage has an expiration date. How you obtained those documents is illegal, Sutton said, his voice dangerously low. Lawyers talk, brother, especially when they're concerned about their client's well-being. She sipped her wine calmly. I'm just saying it would be a shame if this information leaked. All those negotiations that depended on your new family image, all those investments that closed because you finally seemed like a trustworthy, stable man. What do you want? Eloise's question came out more like a growl. Vivian studied her like a scientist examining an interesting insect. I want my brother to regain his sanity, to admit this ridiculous marriage was a mistake, to divorce before you root yourself deeper into our family. Our family is defined by who's in it. Sutton intervened. Not by you. And children, Vivian pressed. The contract specifies there will be no children. What kind of marriage is that? What will father think when he discovers you'll never give him grandchildren because your wife is just a hired actress? The word actress hit Eloise like a slap. She stood from the table, legs barely supporting her. Excuse me. She ran upstairs to the room she now shared with Sutton. They'd begun sleeping together after the hospital incident, first for appearances before the staff, then for something more neither named. She locked herself in the bathroom, hands gripping the sink while trying to control her breathing. It was true. Everything Vivian had said was true. She was an actress in her own life, playing a role she'd accepted out of desperation. And what had she gained? Money for treatments, yes. But also this, humiliation, doubts, the constant feeling of being an imposter in a life that would never belong to her. Eloise. Sutton's voice came from the other side of the door. Open up, please. Go away. Not until we talk. Talk about what? She yanked the door open violently. About your sister being right? About this being a farce? About me playing house while the real world waits to destroy us? Just she's not right. Sutton entered the bathroom, closing the door behind him. And it's not a farce. Not to me. Not for months. The contract says 2 years, a clean divorce. Those were the terms. To hell with the contract. He grabbed her by the shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Listen to me. When I signed those papers, I thought I was making a business deal. A practical solution to 2 different problems. But somewhere between cataloguing books and silent dinners, and watching you bite your lips when you try not to cry, I fell in love with you. Eloise felt the world tilt. Don't say that. Why not? It's the truth. Because it makes everything harder. Tears finally overflowed. Because if this is real, then when it ends, when we reach the expiration date and have to divorce or reveal the truth, it doesn't have to end. His hands moved to her face, wiping tears with trembling fingers. We can break the contract, make this real. Stay together not because a paper says so, but because we choose to. Your sister will reveal everything. Let her. I don't care anymore. And your business. Your partners. We'll find another way. The desperation in his voice was palpable. Eloise, I lost 10 years of my life to fear. Fear of loving again, of risking again. I don't want to waste more time. I don't want to lose you to cowardice. She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe. But Vivian's voice echoed in her head. Hired actress. Imposter. You don't belong. How could she build something real on a foundation of lies? I need time, she finally whispered. To think. Sutton nodded, though the pain in his eyes was evident. Take all the time you need. But Eloise, he leaned in to kiss her forehead with a tenderness that made her want to sob. Don't take too long. Life is short, and we've already wasted too much pretending we don't feel what we feel. When he left, Eloise slid to the bathroom floor, hugging her knees like a frightened child. She'd come to this marriage seeking to save her father. She never expected to need someone to save her, and she certainly never expected to fall in love with the man who'd offered the gilded cage, only to discover that perhaps the door had been open all along. The storm broke 2 days later, more devastating than anyone could have anticipated. Eloise was reviewing household finances, a task Sutton insisted she didn't need to do, but she performed out of habit. When she found the documents, they were hidden in the third drawer of Sutton's desk, in his private study where she rarely entered. Medical bills. But not for her father, for someone else, for Cora. Her hands trembled as she read the dates. The treatments extended for 3 years before the accident. Intensive psychiatric therapy, medication for severe bipolar disorder, multiple hospitalizations in private clinics in New York and Switzerland. Cora hadn't died in a car accident as everyone assumed. It had been suicide. The medical notes were clear. Patient demonstrated persistent self-destructive tendencies, multiple previous attempts. Family opted for absolute confidentiality. Eloise felt nauseated. The entire romantic story Sutton had told about lost love, about the accident that took his wife, had been a lie, or at least a half-truth. You shouldn't be looking at that. Sutton's voice from the doorway made her jump. His face was pale, eyes filled with something that looked like panic and shame mixed. Why? Eloise's question came out as a whisper. Why didn't you tell me the truth? He entered the room, carefully closing the door. Because it's my shame, my failure, not yours. Your wife killed herself and you kept it secret. Eloise let the papers fall onto the desk. You told the world it was an accident. To protect her memory, to protect her family. Sutton ran a hand through his hair, a sign of stress she'd learned to recognize. Cora was brilliant, beautiful, complex. She was also ill, and I couldn't save her. That's why you withdrew from the world. It wasn't just grief, it was guilt. Guilt that consumed me for 10 years. He sat heavily on the leather couch. I told myself I'd never get emotionally involved with someone again, that I'd never risk my heart or impose my complicated life on another person. And then I appeared. Eloise felt the bitter irony, with my complicated life and my lies. You're not like her, he said quickly. Cora couldn't be helped no matter how hard I tried. But you're strong, Eloise. You survive. You fight. And that's why you chose me? Because you knew I wouldn't disappoint you by killing myself? The words came out crueler than intended, but the pain in her chest was real. Sutton flinched as if physically struck. That's unfair. Is it? She approached, confronting him. All this time, while I felt guilty for lying about our marriage, you were keeping even bigger secrets. At least my lie is temporary. Yours is permanent. You're right. The admission caught her off guard. I'm a hypocrite. I asked you for honesty while hiding my past. But Eloise, you need to understand, with Cora, no matter how much I loved her, it wasn't enough. She was determined to destroy herself, and I could only watch. With you, it's different. With you, I can actually help. I can be my savior. Eloise felt something break inside her. I don't need a savior, Sutton. I needed a partner, someone honest. Instead, I have another secret to keep, another lie to bite my lips and hide. The silence between them was dense, loaded with all the unspoken words that had accumulated for months. Finally, Sutton spoke with broken voice. What do you want me to do? I want you to be honest, completely honest. No more secrets, no more half-truths. Eloise felt tears burn her eyes. And I want to know if you ever wanted me for who I am, or if I was just a redemption project. A way to prove to yourself that this time you could save someone. The question hung in the air like a sentence. Sutton opened his mouth to respond, but Eloise's phone rang shrilly, cutting the moment. It was the clinic. Her father had had another crisis. The trip to the hospital was tense silence. Warren drove while Eloise stared out the window, her fingers unconsciously going to her mouth repeatedly, biting her lips until they almost bled. Sutton wanted to take her hand several times, but stopped, respecting the invisible barrier she'd raised. In the emergency room, doctors explained. Severe post-surgical infection. They needed last-generation antibiotics, extremely expensive, not covered by standard insurance. How much? Eloise asked, though she already knew the answer would be beyond her reach. $400,000 for the complete treatment cycle. A terrifying silence fell over her. Even with the marriage agreement, that sum was impossible. She looked at Sutton, seeing the answer before he verbalized it. I'll cover it, he said simply. Sutton, you can't. It's too much. He's your father. Their eyes met, loaded with meaning. And you're my wife. Real or not, what I promised still stands. I won't let you suffer through this alone. Eloise wanted to scream at him no, that she couldn't keep accepting his help when everything between them was broken. But the image of her father fighting to breathe, connected to machines, crushed her pride. Thank you, she whispered, and for the first time in their marriage, the tears she shed weren't from fear or frustration, but from the overwhelming complexity of loving someone imperfect, someone with secrets and scars, someone who, despite everything, kept choosing her again and again. But as she signed the documents for her father's treatment, Eloise wondered if love was enough when it was built on layers of lies. Hers, his, those of a marriage that had begun as transaction and become something too real and too complicated to define. The following days passed in a haze of hospital rooms and whispered conversations. Eloise's father responded slowly to treatments, but the emotional cost was high. She and Sutton existed in a strange limbo, sharing space but avoiding important conversations, dancing around the cracks in their relationship as if ignoring them could make them disappear. A week after the revelation about Cora, Eloise found Sutton in the library at midnight. He sat on the floor surrounded by old photo albums, a half-empty bottle of scotch beside him. You shouldn't drink alone, she said softly from the doorway. I shouldn't do many things. His voice dragged the words. But here we are. Eloise approached, sitting on the floor beside him. The albums showed a different life, a younger Sutton smiling next to Cora on Cape Cod beaches, in Parisian cafes in the Swiss Alps. In every photo, he looked at her with adoration, and in every photo, she seemed to be looking elsewhere. She was beautiful, Eloise observed, feeling a pang of something that wasn't exactly jealousy but came close. She was unhappy, Sutton corrected, running a finger over a photograph. Always. From the day I met her. I thought my love would be enough to change that. How arrogant, right? It's not arrogant to want to save someone you love. So isn't it? He turned to look at her, his eyes red and swollen. Then what am I doing with you? Saving you? Or repeating the same story hoping for a different ending? Eloise felt the words like daggers. Is that what you think? That I'm some kind of replacement? No. God, no. He dropped his head into his hands. You're the complete opposite. Cora needed me and consumed me. You don't need anyone, and that terrifies me more. Why? Because it means you can leave me. The vulnerability in his voice completely disarmed her. The contract says 2 years, 9 months left, and every day that passes I wonder if when the date arrives you'll choose to leave." Eloise couldn't breathe. She'd never considered he was also counting the days, that the weight of limited time affected him as much as her. "And what would you choose?" she asked, though she feared the answer. "If you were free to choose, without contracts or obligations, what would you do?" Sutton looked up, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made the world stop. "I'd choose you. Every day. In every version of this life. I'd choose you even knowing all the challenges, all the problems. Because with you I feel alive for the first time in a decade." Tears rolled down Eloise's cheeks. "I'm so afraid." "Of what?" "That when my father gets better, when I don't need the money anymore, you'll discover I'm not enough. That you only wanted me because I was a project, a problem to solve." "Eloise," Sutton took her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "You're enough, too much even. You challenge me, irritate me, make me want to be better. You're not a project. You're the woman I fell in love with, despite all my attempts to keep distance. But we started with lies. And we can end with truths." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against hers. "Tell me you feel something, even if it's a spark. Give me hope that I'm not alone in this." Eloise closed her eyes, feeling his warmth, the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with scotch and desperation. She'd spent months lying, to her father, to the staff, to the world. But in this moment, in this intimate space of midnight and confessions, she could no longer lie. "I love you," she whispered, and felt his body freeze with shock. "I don't know when it started. Maybe when I saw you watching me in the library. Maybe when you rushed to the hospital in the middle of the night. Maybe when you kissed me like it was real. But I love you, and it terrifies me because I don't know how to love without lying, without hiding, without biting my lips and keeping secrets." The kiss that followed was different from all the others. It wasn't gentle or theatrical. It was hungry, desperate, loaded with months of unresolved tension. Sutton pulled her to him, and Eloise responded with the same urgency, both seeking something alcohol and words couldn't provide. When they separated, breathless, Sutton murmured against her lips, "No more secrets, no more lies, just us. Trying, okay?" "Okay," she promised, and for the first time since entering this impossible marriage, Eloise felt something like hope. Fragile, terrifying, but real. They didn't know then that the universe has cruel ways of testing promises, that truths, once released, have consequences, and that the precipice they stood on was about to crumble beneath their feet. The scandal broke in the newspapers 3 days later. Someone, Eloise suspected Vivian, had leaked the story of the marriage contract. The headlines were merciless. "Manhattan magnate buys wife, the fake marriage of Sutton Reed. Love by contract, the year's farce in New York society." Sutton's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Partners withdrawing investments, emergency meetings, lawyers discussing PR strategies. Eloise locked herself in the library, unable to face the staff who now looked at her with a mixture of pity and judgment. Warren was the only one who dared speak to her. "Most of us already knew," the driver said gently, bringing tea she didn't touch. "Loyal staff notices things, but we also noticed how he looks at you, how you changed him. That can't be faked, Mrs. Reed." The use of her married name made her sob. Was she still Mrs. Reed? Or would all this end with a rushed divorce and a generous check, as had always been planned? Sutton spent 3 days handling the business disaster. When he finally returned to the townhouse, he looked 10 years older. Eloise waited for him in the living room, prepared for the worst. "I lost everything," he said without preamble, letting himself fall onto the couch like a puppet with cut strings. "The Boston investors pulled out, Philadelphia too. My sister is thrilled, of course." Eloise felt her heart break. "I'm so sorry. This is my fault." "No." He looked up, and to her surprise he was smiling, a tired but genuine smile. "It's my fault for thinking I could manipulate the truth, but it's also liberating." "Liberating?" She didn't understand. "You just lost millions. I lost money. I didn't lose what matters." He stood, approaching her. "Eloise, these last 3 days facing public scrutiny, angry calls, partners betraying me, I could only think one thing. That none of it mattered if I lost you in the process. The contract. Screw the contract." He took her hands, squeezing them. I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. No pressure, no obligations, just honesty. Eloise nodded, unable to speak. Do you want to stay with me? Not for the money, not for your father, not for any reason except that you want to. Because if the answer is no, I'll understand. I'll give you what I promised and let you go. But if there's the slightest possibility this is real for you too. Yes. The word came out before she could think it. Yes, I want to stay. I'm terrified and confused and don't know how to navigate this. But yes, I choose you. I choose us. The smile that lit up Sutton's face was worth more than any business investment. He lifted her in an embrace that made her feel safe for the first time in months. When he set her down, his eyes shone with unshed tears. Then we'll do this right. We'll start over. What do you mean? I want to court you, take you on dates, meet your family properly. No contracts, no agreements. Just two people discovering if they can build something real. Eloise felt laughter bubbling in her chest. We're already married. Technical details. He smiled, drying a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The paper says we're married, but I want to win you. I want you to choose me every day, not because you have to, but because you want to. And so began a second love story, strange and wonderful, between two people who were already legally united, but emotionally learning to trust. Sutton took her to small restaurants in Brooklyn, away from the high society that had judged them. They walked through Central Park hand in hand, like new lovers exploring New York. They truly talked about everything, about Cora and her struggle with mental illness, about Eloise's mother and how her sudden death had left scars, about fears and dreams and all the small truths they'd hidden behind contracts and appearances. Eloise's father, recovering slowly at the clinic, watched them with wise eyes. This is how it should have been from the beginning, he commented one afternoon when both visited. Two people getting to know each other, without rush or pressure. Dad, it's complicated, Eloise began. Love is always complicated, daughter. He took both their hands, joining them. But what I saw in you from the first day wasn't acting. It was fear. Fear of admitting what you felt. I'm glad you finally give yourselves permission. One evening, 3 weeks after the scandal, Sutton took Eloise to the townhouse rooftop. He'd prepared a dinner under the Manhattan stars, candles flickering in the gentle November breeze. Remember when you asked me why I notice when you bite your lips? He asked while they ate the pasta he'd cooked himself, clumsily but with love. Eloise nodded, unconsciously touching her lip. It's because I watch you all the time. I look for signs that you're uncomfortable, scared, lying to protect others. Because every time you do it, I want to be the person you don't have to lie to. I want to be your safe place. You are, she admitted. Even when everything's a disaster, when the whole world judges us, with you I feel safe. And your tick. He smiled. Do you still bite your lips? Eloise considered the question. She realized that in recent weeks the gesture had diminished significantly. Less, because I have less to hide. Good. Sutton raised his wine glass. Then let's toast. To honesty, to second chances, to loves that start with lies but end in truths. They toasted under Manhattan's starlit sky, two damaged souls learning to heal together, to build something real on the remains of what had been a marriage of convenience. It wouldn't be easy. The scandal was still fresh, partners still distant, Vivian still a thorn in their side. But for the first time, Eloise believed they could make it. Not as patron and employee, not as savior and saved, but as equals, as partners, as imperfect people choosing each other day after day, truth after truth. Summer arrived in New York with scorching heat and blue skies, but inside the Upper East Side townhouse, something new and warm was growing. Sutton had begun rebuilding his business empire, but this time with transparency and different values. Instead of chasing major Boston investors, he focused on community projects, affordable housing, restoration of historic buildings in forgotten neighborhoods. Eloise became his partner, in more than name. Her knowledge of literature and history proved invaluable working with cultural preservation authorities. Together, they transformed abandoned properties in Brooklyn and Queens, creating spaces that honored heritage while serving the community. Who would have thought a librarian and a disgraced businessman would make a good team? She joked one afternoon while reviewing blueprints in the study. I did, Sutton responded simply. From the moment I saw you catalogue books as if each one contained the universe's secret, I knew you were special. The relationship with Vivienne remained tense, but one day, unexpectedly, she appeared at the townhouse. Without Gregory, without her usual armor of jewelry and condescension. Just Vivienne, looking tired and more human than Eloise had ever seen her. "I've come to apologize," she said without preamble, sitting in the living room without invitation. "What I did, leaking the contract was cruel, and I was wrong." Eloise exchanged a glance with Sutton. "What changed?" he asked cautiously. "Gregory left me." Vivienne laughed bitterly. "Turns out our perfect society marriage was also a farce. He'd had a mistress in Greenwich for 5 years. When I confronted him about his hypocrisy after how I judged your situation, he finally admitted he only married me for the Reed family connection." "Vivienne, I'm sorry," Eloise began. "No." Vivienne raised a hand. "I don't need pity. I need to acknowledge I was arrogant. I saw your contractual marriage and judged it, when my real one was equally empty. At least you were honest about what it was. We lied for 10 years. Silence settled. Finally, Sutton spoke. "Marriage doesn't define us, Vivienne. What we choose to do with it does. Judge, you chose to turn yours into something real." Vivienne's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "You can hate me and I'd understand, but I wanted you to know. I envy you. You found authenticity in the least expected place." Eloise stood, approaching Vivienne. To everyone's surprise, she hugged her. "Family is complicated, but if you're willing to try, so are we." The thaw with Vivienne was gradual but genuine. She began visiting regularly, sometimes bringing ideas for community projects, other times simply to have coffee and talk without masks. Eloise discovered that beneath the icy facade was an intelligent and wounded woman, someone who'd lost her way trying to maintain appearances. Eloise's father was discharged in January, his recovery considered miraculous by doctors. The first night home, now truly home in the townhouse Eloise had stopped seeing as a cage and begun seeing as belonging, they organized a small dinner. Just the 3 of them and Warren, who'd become a close friend as well as employee. "I never thought I'd live to see this," Eloise's father said, looking around the table with bright eyes. "My daughter happy, with a man who loves her in a place where she belongs." "Dad," Eloise felt tears threaten. "Let me finish." His voice was stronger now, thanks to treatments. "When you accepted that job, I thought it was just to help me. I never imagined you'd find your place in the world, but you did, and it wasn't the townhouse or the money. It was finding someone who truly sees you." Sutton squeezed Eloise's hand under the table. She no longer bit her lips nervously. She no longer needed to hide her emotions. "I see you," Sutton murmured that night when they were alone in their room. They'd begun sleeping together without pretense, their bodies finding comfort in proximity. "Every day I see you more clearly, and every day I fall more in love." "I thought you couldn't fall more in love," she teased, snuggling against his chest. "Turns out love has no ceiling." He kissed her head. "Only depths to keep exploring." Spring's arrival brought new beginnings. The Brooklyn housing project inaugurated with great success, providing affordable homes to families displaced by gentrification. Eloise organized a community library on the ground floor, filling it with books Sutton had collected for years. "This is better than having them gathering dust," he said while watching neighborhood children explore the shelves with wonder. "Cora always said I collected books like a dragon hoards gold. She'd be happy to see them used this way." It was the first time he'd mentioned Cora without pain. Eloise took his hand. "I think she'd approve of who you are now." "I hope so." He looked at Eloise with infinite tenderness. "You helped me discover that saving someone isn't loving them. It's loving someone that makes you want to be better for yourself and for them, learning to distinguish the difference. That was your gift." The anniversary of their contractual wedding arrived in March, just as New York filled with cherry blossoms. A full year since Eloise had first entered the library, nervous and needy, biting her lips to hide her desperation. Sutton took her back to the Hudson Valley Chapel where they'd married, but this time there were no contracts or pretenses. "Marry me," he said at the empty chapel's entrance. Again, but now for real. Eloise laughed, tears rolling down her cheeks. "We're already married, you fool." On paper, but I want real vows. Words I choose freely, not because a contract requires it. He knelt, producing a different ring. Simple, beautiful, obviously chosen with care. Eloise, will you marry me? Not for 2 years, but forever. Not to save companies or pay treatments, but because when I think of my future, I only see you. Yes, she whispered, almost voiceless. 1,000 times, yes. They kissed at the chapel's threshold, a kiss that tasted of new promises and second chances. And when they separated, Eloise realized something. Her lips were relaxed without tension. She no longer needed to bite her lips to hide truths. Because with Sutton, she'd finally found someone with whom she could be completely, imperfectly honest. The second wedding was planned for May, when the townhouse garden's roses would be in full bloom. It would be intimate, only close family and real friends, not the parade of investors and partners that had characterized the first. But 2 weeks before the ceremony, Sutton's past returned in an unexpected way. Eloise was in the library when Warren announced a visitor. A woman in her 40s, elegant but with an air of fragility, waited in the living room. She introduced herself as Helena, Cora's younger sister. "I shouldn't be here," Helena began, her hands trembling as she held a teacup. "But when I heard about your new wedding, I knew I had to come to warn you." A chill ran down Eloise's spine. Warn me about what? About my sister. About what her relationship with Sutton was really like. Helena paused, searching for words. Cora. She wasn't the victim everyone thinks. She was complex, yes. Ill, yes. But also manipulative. Eloise sat slowly. "I don't understand." Cora had bipolar disorder, but she refused to take medication consistently, said it made her feel flattened. Instead, she used her episodes to manipulate Sutton. She'd threatened to harm herself every time he tried to set boundaries or make decisions without her. "Does Sutton know you're here?" Eloise asked. "No, and he'll probably hate me for coming." Helena pulled an envelope from her purse. "These are letters Cora wrote but never sent, found after her death. In them, she admits she knew exactly how to control Sutton, how to use his guilt and protective nature against him." Eloise took the envelope with trembling hands. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because Sutton has carried guilt that wasn't his." Helena's eyes filled with tears. "He blamed himself for my sister's death, but the truth is, Cora made that final decision when he finally had the courage to suggest he needed space, that their relationship was becoming toxic. She chose to punish him in the most permanent way possible." Eloise felt nauseous. This would destroy Sutton. Or free him. Helena stood, preparing to leave. "That's your decision. You can keep these letters and protect him from the truth, or you can trust he's strong enough to face it. I just thought you should know before committing your life to someone who may never have forgiven himself for something that wasn't his fault." After Helena left, Eloise remained alone with the envelope, feeling as if she held a grenade without a pin. Should she show Sutton? Or burn the letters and let the past remain buried? She remembered the words they'd promised each other. No more secrets. No more lies. That night, while they dined on the terrace under the stars, Eloise placed the envelope between them on the table. Sutton looked at it with curiosity, then growing alarm when she explained where it came from. "You don't have to read them," she said softly. "I can burn them right now, but we promised total honesty, and hiding this would be starting our new life with another secret." Sutton took the envelope with visibly trembling fingers. "Did you read them?" "No. I thought you should decide if you want us to read them together, or just you, or neither." He studied the envelope for a long moment. Finally, he opened it and began to read. Eloise watched emotions cross his face: shock, pain, disbelief, and finally, something that looked like relief mixed with sadness. When he finished, he dropped the letters onto the table, burying his face in his hands. Eloise stood, circling the table to hug him from behind, her cheek against his back. "It wasn't your fault," she whispered. "It never was. For so many years." His voice came out muffled. "So many years blaming myself, thinking if I'd been more patient, more understanding, more something, she'd still be alive. Cora was ill in ways you couldn't cure, and according to these letters, she knew it. She used that illness as a weapon, and that's not love. That's manipulation." Sutton turned in the chair, burying his face in Eloise's abdomen. She held his head, stroking his hair, while he finally allowed himself to cry. Not for Cora, he explained later, but for the man he'd been, trapped in a toxic relationship, without understanding what was happening. "How can you love me?" he asked when he'd finally calmed. "After all this, after knowing how blind I was." "I love you because you're human," Eloise responded. "Because you made mistakes and learned from them. Because when you met me, you didn't try to control or save me, but support me. That's the difference. Helena was right to give you these letters," he said after a long silence. "I needed to read this. I needed to know I wasn't the villain in that story, even if I wasn't the hero either. You were human, that's enough." They spent the rest of the night on the terrace, talking about Cora in ways they'd never been able to before. Sutton shared memories, good and bad, without the filter of guilt that had always colored his recollections. Eloise listened, offering understanding without judgment. At dawn, they decided to burn the letters together in the study's fireplace. As Cora's words turned to ash, Sutton murmured, "May she rest in peace. Truly. This time." Eloise embraced him, and when they kissed, she knew they were finally free. Free from contracts, from secrets, from ghosts of the past, ready to write their own story, one truth at a time. Their second wedding day dawned perfect. Cloudless blue sky, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of garden roses. Eloise prepared in the room she now shared with Sutton, but this time there were no nerves or doubts, only pure anticipation. Vivian arrived early to help with the dress, a simple ivory silk design Eloise had chosen herself, not because a contract required it, but because it made her feel beautiful. "You're radiant," Vivian said genuinely while adjusting the veil. "Nothing like that first time. Then you looked scared. Now you look complete." "I am," Eloise responded, studying herself in the mirror, and it was true. She was no longer the frightened Brooklyn girl pretending to belong. She was Eloise Reed, a woman who'd learned that home wasn't a place but the people you chose. Her father waited at the foot of the stairs, dressed in a new suit, looking healthier than he had in years. His eyes filled with tears when he saw her descend. "Your mother would be so proud," he whispered, offering his arm. "Not because of the townhouse or the money, but because you found the courage to be happy." The ceremony was held in the townhouse garden, under an arch of white and red roses. Only 20 guests, Warren and some loyal staff, Helena and her family, a handful of real friends who'd supported the couple during the scandal. No business partners or investors pretending interest. When Eloise appeared in the garden on her father's arm, Sutton wiped away a tear without shame. This time, there was no doubt in his gaze, only pure love without complications. The vows were short but deeply personal. Eloise spoke first. "Sutton, when we met, I was a woman who hid truths by biting my lips. You were a man who hid his pain behind marble walls and contracts. We were both broken, both scared. But something magical happened. We found each other in that imperfection. I learned that honesty isn't weakness, and you learned that love isn't saving someone but walking beside them. Today I promise to be your partner in every step. I promise to tell the truth, even when it hurts. And I promise to love you not despite your scars, but including them because they made you the man I fell in love with." Sutton took her hands, his thumbs gently caressing her knuckles before speaking. "Eloise, you taught me that true love isn't control or rescue. It's choice. Every day, choosing to see the other person, listen to them, honor them. You gave me permission to release the guilt that consumed me for a decade. You showed me I could love without fear, trust without conditions. Today I promise to be your refuge when you need rest, but never your cage. I promise to celebrate your strength, not try to diminish it. And I promise every morning for the rest of my life to look at you and remember how lucky I am that you chose to stay." There wasn't a dry eye when they exchanged rings, the same ones from the first wedding, but now loaded with real meaning. And when the officiant declared them husband and wife, truly and finally, the kiss they shared was a promise sealed by choice, not contract. The reception was joyful and relaxed, no formal speeches or rigid protocols. Warren proposed an emotional toast about second chances. Vivienne surprised everyone by sharing a funny story about how Sutton had been terrified the first time he met Eloise, hiding in his office for an hour before daring to enter the library. "I knew you were dangerous," Sutton admitted, taking Eloise's hand, "because from the first moment I knew you could destroy all my defenses." "And I did," she responded with a smile, "but only because you destroyed mine first." As the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in oranges and pinks, Eloise and Sutton escaped from the reception to have a private moment in the library where everything had begun. He led her to the same desk where she'd worked that first day. "Remember when I asked why you bite your lips?" he said, sitting her on the desk and standing between her legs. "How could I forget? I almost died of embarrassment." "I was terrified," he admitted, "because I already knew you weren't just another employee. There was something about you that made me want to discover every secret, every hidden truth." "And now?" Eloise wrapped her arms around his neck. "Do you still want to discover my secrets?" "Now I want to spend the rest of my life learning everything about you, the big things and the small. How you take your coffee, what books you reread when you're sad, what makes you laugh until you can't breathe." "That's a long project," she teased. "I have the rest of my life to dedicate to it." He kissed her softly. "And Eloise, thank you." "For what?" "For not biting your lips when you said your vows, for trusting me with all your truth, for staying when you could have left." Eloise touched his cheek with infinite tenderness. "Leave? And miss this life with you? Never. This is my home now, not the townhouse or Manhattan. You're my home." They stayed like that, wrapped in each other's embrace, while the sound of celebration continued outside. In that space where they'd begun as strangers united by necessity, they now stood as partners chosen by love. Months later, when curious people asked about their unconventional story, Eloise always smiled and said, "Sometimes love begins in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes you need to sign a contract to discover what's really worth it." And if anyone noticed she no longer nervously bit her lips, if they saw the way Sutton looked at her, as if holding the world in his arms, they understood they'd witnessed something rare, a love that had begun with lies and ended in the deepest truth of all. That when two people choose to truly see each other, with all their imperfections, all their fears, all their secrets, and decide on each other every day, that's more powerful than any contract, more lasting than any promise written on paper. That love, forged in honesty and tempered by choice, is the only one that truly lasts forever. Years later, Eloise would write in her private journal, "Someone once asked me why I bit my lips. The truth is, it was my way of containing words I was afraid to say. But Sutton taught me that the most important words, I love you, I choose you, I stay, are the ones we should never contain. Now my lips are free, not because I'm no longer afraid, but because I finally found someone with whom it's safe to be vulnerable. And that's the true happy ending." In the townhouse garden, under the same rose arch where they'd married the second time, Sutton planted a special rose bush, one that would bloom each spring in shades of emerald green, a reminder of the dress Eloise had worn that first night at the plaza, when everything changed. They called it Hidden Truth because, as Eloise explained to her father the first time it bloomed, sometimes the most beautiful truths are hidden in unexpected places. You just need the courage to look and the honesty to see. And each spring, when that rose bush bloomed, Eloise and Sutton renewed their vows, not formally, not before witnesses, but in the intimate silence of their garden, whispering promises they now knew by heart, but never lost meaning. I choose you. I choose you. Again. And forever. Because some loves are written in contracts that fade, but others are carved in hearts willing to change, to grow, to choose truth over convenience. And those loves, those are the ones that survive any storm.